When he examined it, and he said, "This is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Notice what Reuben did. He had good intentions. He stopped a murder. He planned to rescue Joseph later. And when he found out he failed, he still did nothing. He did not stand up against his brothers. He did not condemn their actions. He allowed evil to triumph. See, Reuben's intentions were good. He wasn't present when Joseph was sold into slavery. But his inaction and his absence made him just as guilty. And you know what? His guilt haunted him for the rest of his life. At least for a very long time. Because in Genesis chapter 42 and in verse 21, as they were in Egypt to buy food, and this is decades later, it's still on Reuben's mind. Genesis 42, verse 21, "And they said to one another, Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we did not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered and said, Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? And would you not listen? Come now, now comes the reckoning for his blood." Reuben caused it because he did nothing. His brothers actually did it. But because Reuben didn't stop it, he was just as guilty as the rest of them. There's a little tiny book in the Minor Prophets called Obadiah. It's not a very long book. And in that book, in verse 11, it's only got one chapter. I'm going to have trouble getting it to flip there. A lot of trouble getting it to flip there. Obadiah, chapter 1. Only one chapter. Verse 11 is the one I want. I keep passing it up. There we go. Obadiah, verse 11. It's about the nation of Edom. And God condemns Edom for the destruction of Jerusalem. Which is interesting because Edom had nothing to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. They were destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar. But he says in verse 11, "On the day that you stood aloft, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them." You're just as guilty as the people that raided Jerusalem and destroyed it. Why? Because they stood aloft. They did nothing. They didn't try to stop it. They didn't condemn it. They stood on the sidelines and watched it happen. There are Christians today who fail to face the real foe of error and fight evil. Instead, what they do is they turn on each other. They brutally attack out of bitterness, out of hatred for one another. And meanwhile, evil triumphs. In a sense, they become spiritual cannibals. And Paul warns about that in Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, and in verse 15. Oops, did I get the wrong? Pardon? Oh, I'm in Ephesians. That's why I was reading wrong. I'm looking at it saying, this is not the verse I picked out. Galatians 5, verse 15. But if you bite and devour one another, and take care that you could be consumed by one another. What is it that happens with people? When they don't do anything at all, they get idle. They can become busybodies. They find something to pick on. And they start picking on one another. Nothing's good enough anymore. Some in their envy of others provoke Christians, taunting them to misstep just so that they can feel then justified. They don't like it when somebody else looks better than they do. Take it again and look at Galatians 5, this time verse 26. Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. And while the action of these Christians are shameful, what about those who stand by and do nothing? If you stand aside and do nothing while your brothers and sisters are being slandered, are you any better? We have to stand against wrong, even if it's among ourselves. Because it ought not to be there. We ought to have love for one another. See, those who fail to do good are sowing dangerous seeds. In Galatians 6 and verse 7 says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap. We get what we sow. You do nothing, you get nothing in return, including no heaven. Don't allow evil to triumph by your inactions. We got to stand up and be counted. Stand up against evil, rebuke evil men and their wicked ways. It won't make you popular. Sometimes you'll find yourself in opposition with people that you love. But you got to stand for what is right. I hope you think about these things today. I hope the Spurgeons start doing and getting active again. One of the things that's been bothering me the last year or so is that the congregation here is slowly drifting smaller and smaller, despite all the efforts. And for the vast majority of the part is because the ones who are putting much effort out are just a minority. We all have to do what's right. We need to teach our neighbors. We need to talk to other people. We need to invite friends. Otherwise, yes, this church will die. Because that's the way that life is. Because guess what? We're all getting older. And we won't be here in the next generation. We have to get going. Hope you'll think about these things. If there's anyone here who is not a child of God, there is no better time than right now to put on Christ. One of the thrills of last week was seeing two people, or at least hearing that. I didn't get to go see it. 2 people got baptized from the lessons that were being taught. One was in the middle of the night. But it's a thrill to see people respond to the gospel. People doing what is right and people responding. If there's anyone here who wishes to become a child of God, there's no better time than right now to put on Christ. If there's anyone here is a child of God, like the prayers of the brethren on your behalf. It's about time to start doing what is right. Why don't you come forward as we stand and sing the song we'll select.